Now this is going to be the first in a series of videos. They're going to be, I hope, the first ever that we're using all Brodak dope to finish what we hope is going to be a world-class airplane. Now if you're one of John Brodak's customers and you're new to the world of high-level finishing, obviously one of the first things you want to do is get a Brodak catalog, thumb through it, get whatever supplies you're going to need to do the job, but the main thing you're going to want to get, and it's totally new, is this complete line of Brodak dope products. Now I honestly feel that never in the history of the whole model aviation event, let alone control line, has anybody put the time, the resources, or the energy level forward to make a dream happen. And the dream is to have Brodak dope be the best possible finishing medium when you're finishing your next plane. And we're going to hopefully be able to help you put out a finish better than anyone you've ever done, and from this point in time each one should get just a little bit better, make your enjoyment of the world of model aviation just that much better. My name, of course, is Wendy Rutnowski, and it's been one of my lifelong goals to share the information that I've accumulated over the years, over 40 years of building and flying these model planes. And I've done it through the medium of video and the medium of writing columns for magazines and articles for Stunt News. I've been fortunate enough over the years to be gifted enough, I guess, to endure the pains of working with several finishing mediums that have been totally unacceptable, one of them being Imron, some of the epoxy and car paints that make the planes extremely heavy. And I've really tried all my life. It's been one of my lifelong goals to find a finishing medium that would be world-class, easy to use, and give excellent results to anybody that was willing to put in a little effort into the finish. The pilots of 6 different nationals have voted my plane the concourse winner. I feel that's a very high honor, something I wanted to achieve all my life. But it was a secondary goal to something that I really wanted to achieve, and that was to be able to help a lot of people. And in my flying models columns that I've written for magazines, many articles, many of the things I've written in Stunt News, the overall goal was, and still is, to help as many people as possible get that real good enjoyment out of the hobby that I've gotten, and let them taste the success of seeing that first finish when it's buffed out, sitting in the sun, and what a thrill that really is when you bring a model down to the flying field and everybody really looks at it and says, wow, how'd you do that? Done most of the work in the shop, but we're looking forward to a whole new era of working with this product. And I really am enthusiastic about it to the point that I've volunteered to do some testing for John Brodak. He's been extremely aggressive about trying to develop this product. We've put a lot of time in behind the scenes, and we're going to be doing on this little set of videos what I hope is going to be an experience you can share with us, and you can in turn, I hope, pass that on to your friends too at the same time, so that everybody has these nice finishes. What I want to do, before we even go to the shop and before we even start working with a piece of wood, I want to give a real rough idea of some of the concepts that go into a really high-level finish. And this applies to if you're painting an automobile, a boat, a car, a guitar, your fingernails. A surface that isn't perfectly flat in any way. Let's try to make one as flat as possible. What's going to happen to these surfaces is, if you have this understanding early on, you will know that eventually you're going to want to come up with a flat surface. A flat surface like a mirror reflects light. But if you make this surface and fill all this roughness in with material, whether it's filler coat or dope, epoxy, whatever, if you fill that all in, the finish is going to be heavy. If you have a very little to fill in, well, you can see right away that's going to be half the weight of the finish underneath it. Because there's a real reality check here. The reality check is anybody can do good finishing if you're willing to make it heavy. If you're willing to go into an area where the planes, I call it decoupage, you wind up with a plane that, yeah, looks pretty, but it's way too heavy. Now this finish here, just as an example, you'd have all this filler coat. Well, you can see right away, this would be too heavy. This would certainly be a little better. This would be, well, we're getting better each time. I don't know where that would be, but this is what we want. We want the wood, the cap strips, the ribs, every part of the finish of raw wood. And this is our first thought. The first thought of a good finish is, what does the raw wood look like? What does that raw wood look like? Now, if you're willing to spend the time to get your raw wood as smooth as possible, get all your ribs trued up, you're going to find out that you have a lot less of this on the airplane. And so our first step in any model is to get all the raw wood as smooth as possible. Before you do anything, raw wood being perfectly smooth is a very important part of getting that lightweight finish. Now, just as an example, so these are my friends that came from Puerto Rico to fly at our local contest last year, a couple of years ago in fact. They've joined us at many other contests. They were building beautiful models. I mean, these models looked really as good as you possibly could, but then when you went and picked them up, you found out they were on the heavy side. They were using automotive finish products, not sanding the wood perfectly clear, and over the course of the years, every time they've come to our contest, the models have gotten better, lighter, and they're still just as shiny. So I'm using this as just an example. I'm sure one of the things that you have to understand right in the very beginning is if the raw wood has to be filled with putty, with filler, with anything, it's just going along for the ride. It's better to have the surface flat before you even start. So now let's just assume, for the sake of argument, you've got your model completely sanded flat. One of the easiest mistakes to make is to put on a very minimum amount of dope and then tissue over it. And the reason for that is, even though it looks like that's a great idea right at the very beginning because you've saved all that weight, in effect what you've done, and I'm trying to make this as simple as possible right in the beginning, because I realize most of the people that can benefit from this need basic information. They don't need high-tech whiz-banger information. You need to take the silk span and you need to attach it to the wood. You need to get a bond. Now, typically, with other finishing products, this would take 5, 6, maybe 7 coats. We're going to try to do this in fewer coats because the quality of material is that much better. It's just a better quality material than ever's been available on the market. And what I want to emphasize is to get the bond on the wood, this bond from the silk span to the wood, to be adequate using the minimum amount of dope. So that overall, this becomes the base of any good finish, and that the base doesn't wind up being, in the worst of all worlds, you wind up with this, which then makes the silk span, and you can see what's going to start happening already when you start off. If you get this concept in your mind that you have to start off at the bottom, you're going to wind up and you're going to be annoyed to death. And you're going to wind up with all of these areas being filled with some kind of filler, talc filler, Brodak filler, something. And so I know I'm overemphasizing this, but I really have to say it over and over again, because almost everybody that I've really been able to help make big gains in their finish, it was in the raw wood, and it was in the fact of getting that raw wood that it was dead nuts level before you ever put any dope on. That's the single biggest thing you can do to improve your finish. Now, as soon as you soak 3-4 coats of dope onto wood, what happens? Wood starts to swell, the grain comes to the surface, and then what happens is you have to resand it. So now you've got a few coats of dope on here and maybe even the soak span, but it's really not as flat as it should be. So from time to time, you're going to want to go back and block sand off the high spots, because if you wait to the very end, you wind up filling all these valleys with filler and putty and red lead and all kinds of materials. And what you really want to wind up with is a flat surface. It's going to inevitably swell from the dope, but then you're going to knock it back down. And each time you do that, it's going to swell just a little bit less, and about the third time you do it, it's going to stay flat. And if you get that as your base, you can see that you've saved all of this material, all of this extra work, and the only thing I can relate it to that makes sense is a good foundation on a house. If you spend your time getting a good foundation, swell the wood, sand it, swell the wood, sand it, get the silk span on, a couple of coats, and keep block sanding those early coats, sanding them out. What you're going to find out with is you've saved all this weight. All of this winds up being something that's just going along for the ride, when this is what you want to wind up with. And I hope this idea, once this concept is in your mind, the rest of this will all make sense. And your finish will be light as well as beautiful. Now, the first thing we did with this model, and keep in mind, this is like all of the models you see in Iraqi, this is one of a model that was built right from the very beginning on video to subscriber videos. All the videos are available from John Brodak, from myself, direct. But one of the things is we took an exceptional amount of time to get all the ribs trued up, and that's shown in detail on other videos. Get the trailing edge straight, get all the ribs even. And when we were all done, we even applied a coat of dope to the raw ribs themselves, just to harden up the wood and keep moisture from getting in there and swelling them up and down as we go through the finishing process. But the first thing with any kind of model like this is getting that bottom coat, like the foundation on the house, as straight and even as possible. No matter how you finish or with what material, you're going to develop a layer of material. This is going to be your wood. This in-between piece is going to be called the substrate. The substrate can amount to be, for most applications, clear dope, filler coat, tissue, combinations of dope filler, talc, sanded, any combination, primers. But you're going to wind up with this base, and in the world of finishing, that's called the substrate. Once the substrate is perfect, or it's as good as you can make it, what we do is put on a coat of silver. Now, the silver is there to show flaws, because as you're going through this process, more and more minute flaws are going to show up, and this silver is going to show little imperfections, both high and low. And it's this silver coat that we're going to do over and over, and at that point in time, you pick a level of finish that you're willing to work toward. Sanding these coats of silver can be time consuming, but the end result again is that you've thinned out that amount of the finish, gotten rid of all the imperfections, and then you're going to find out, as we did on a couple of the test models that we've tried, what you're going to find out with is the colors. The Brodak colors will typically cover over a silver finish in one or at worst two coats. So you need a very thin amount, and it's that thin amount that makes the finish light. You don't want to put any more colored dope on a plane, no matter what brand it is, than you have to. See, we're almost like we're building a sandwich. And then you're going to want to add detailing, decals, electrosets. These are going to be little high spots in the finish. We're going to go over them with individual coats of clear. And then we're going to do the final finish on this with Brodak clear. Now I'm trying to get all these little charts and graphs out of the way first so you can get a little idea of what we're trying to achieve. We have a wood. We have a silk span filler clear substrate, as thin an amount of color as we possibly can get away with, and even more clear than we really need, because if a model then were to come out too heavy, it would be just a matter of sanding off with 1200 paper some of these coats of clear, and you could actually balance the model or achieve a vertical CG just by sanding or adding paint. Now, this whole sandwich becomes the finish of the model. It serves a lot of purposes. It adds a tremendous amount of strength over what a raw wood monocoat model would have. A dope finish adds a tremendous amount of strength. In its shrinking, it takes it adds strength to a surface. Any curved surface, it tends to make it very rigid, very strong, very fuel-proof. Now, all fuel, while we're talking about fuel-proof, the most any reasonable finish will withstand on a regular basis is 5% nitro. Now, when we did our testing, all the fuel I ever have used is 5% nitro. But if you're going to use a higher nitro fuel, you're going to have to be really careful, like with any finish. And the only exception to this would be Imron, which is really an impractical, very toxic finish most modelers wouldn't want to use. You're going to want to try to, if at all possible, use 5% nitro fuel. And if you can't, be real careful when fueling the plane or letting raw fuel get on the plane, because all dope finishes are typically only fuel resistant up to about 5% nitro. Just some do's and don'ts real quick. All of the tissue we use is medium weight. Lightweight tissue to me is less than perfect. I always get better results using medium tissue. When you start using any dope product, in the old days people would mix this brand with that brand, this thinner with that brand. They would play musical leapfrog chairs, and in the end there'd always be a problem. Start with Brodak. Thinner. Brodak retarder. And if you're refinishing an older plane, you might want some Brodak rejuvenator, but Brodak dope. Now, it may seem like these are very simple things. And gee whiz, I wanted to find some high-tech stuff out on this tape. You know, the highest tech thing you can find out is to keep it simple. The simpler you can make this and the simpler you can keep it, the better results you'll have. Now, I always say, if you start with one brand and you use their thinner and their retarder, what this gives you is the best chance for success. The best chance you're going to get using one brand, not mixing, marrying, varying, using up the old jars, using up this, that, or the other thing. Or my friend used some hardware store thinner or some. Give yourself the best chance. This is a very, very inexpensive hobby. Start with fresh material. Use Brodak thinner, Brodak retarder, and Brodak dope through the whole process. And you'll probably have the best, no matter what skill level you'll have, the best results and have the best finish possible. Just as a matter of reference, we do everything in the shop, and we do it in as simple an environment as possible. But one thing is really helpful. If you have a TV and a VCR in your shop and you can play a tape over and over and over again, you'll find out there's things you missed the second, the third, the fourth time around. There's a lot of information on these tapes that would be possible no other way. The tapes not only offer entertainment value or at least inspirational value, they offer you a chance, and I play them in the background constantly to learn new things, pick up little things you didn't see the first time around. There's always good information to be had on the tapes. And mine are certainly not the only tapes available. All of the people making tapes, Bob Hunt, Bill Harding, they're all putting quality information out. Take advantage of all of them. No matter what skill level you are, there's going to be a time when you have a question. And I've spent my whole life asking questions, so I know the first thing is you have a question. Gee, how should I do this? How could I do that? Well, where am I going to get this information from? The first thing, needless to say, is read the label on the jar, the box, the bottle. Read the instructions. Read is always the first thing. Second thing, find out if there's any videos available that cover that subject. Spending a few dollars on video can add to your video library, add to your collection of articles that have already been written. It's an excellent source. I also have what I feel are little tips, tricks. Now, over the years, anytime I see something that's really interesting or something I might want to refer back to, I have a drawer that I take the pages of the booklet out, I put them right in an area where I can get to them right away. Now, in the area of finishing, so much of this stuff has been written about. First off, you can read about it. All the magazines have good finishing articles. Several excellent videos, beginner and advanced, are available from John Brodak. Hobby shops are even carrying these videos. Tricks and tips. Now, you get into the last area, and this is where I think most of us fall down just a little bit. Now, I would say if you don't belong to Pampa, needless to say, join Pampa. One of the things you get when you join Pampa is you get a mailing list. And there are several people, including myself, that are more than happy to help you with some phone time, email, a letter. Don't be afraid to call these people. There's several good people that I know of that have helped me. And I'd call, and they'll be more than willing to give you a little bit of their time. They take it as a compliment. You're going to make their day a little more complete. And now that you've learned this information, or you've gathered it from whatever source is, you now incur the obligation to pass it on. When you're down at the field and you see somebody that's trying to learn, well, gee whiz, I can't seem to figure out how to sand a piece of wood. You know what? Loan them your copy of articles. Loan them a copy of your tapes. Invite them over for a pizza. Hey, if you know your little trick that they could take advantage of, if you have a spray gun and they don't, invite them over. Get them to join Pampa. Get them to get on that phone. Get them to add to our technology base. Now, there's several other people working on their first Brodak full finish. Frank McMillan is one of them, of course. Several other people here were using the material already. We've used it on Ken Thompson's Nobler, but all of us have kind of a little unwritten code. Pass it on. Pass that information on, and everybody that comes in contact with the hobby will be better off. What I always like to do, and it's just a simple thing, I always like to have one little part of the airplane that I can use for a test. In this case, I used the rudder. I did a little test. I let it dry out while I was working on the wing. So now I can get a little feel for just how long the material is going to take to dry and set up. But I was real pleased with the original test program. The original test program ran about 6 months. But now I'm ready to get down to the shop, clear the bench, and start putting on what I hope is going to be my first full finish using all 100% Brodak finishing materials. Today I'm trying to plan out a really good day because very rarely do I get a day like today where Karen won't be in the house for the whole day so I can do some doping inside. She's gone away to a business meeting, and so I'm trying to take advantage of this. Anyway, before I get into trying my little experiment with the primer, I want to get a couple of coats of dope on all the edges. I want to make sure with my bare fingers, again, I've already done this, but just double check along the way. I don't have any rough edges on these at all. Any high spots, no matter what. A tool like this is real handy, again, no matter, I know this is redundant, no matter which ship you have, Banshee, the SV11, wouldn't matter. Just pick up the high spots with the chalk, and you can look real close, any spots you know you've missed. Now, one of the things on this particular plane I did is I got the corners real thin. I have a 60-foot plywood inlay here, so what I'm going to do when I get to do the final tissue here, I'll lay a little bit of carbon fiber in there. Basically, I'm ready to start, and I'm going to try to get all the perimeters of this wing, get a couple of coats of dope on today, and then hopefully come back after it dries, get the edges dressed off again, because don't forget, after the first coat of dope, the wood is going to swell, kind of get back. Then it's going to swell a little bit less, and eventually you're going to build that nice, hard, smooth shell on top of everything. And that whole thing should be really nice and smooth when I'm done. A little bit of, when I ran the original shrink test on the Brodak material, I have the original stuff, but this is always a good idea. Label your jar. Shrink test material, Brodak clear, 50/50 Brodak thinner. So I don't have to guess what's in the jar. And that's one of the problems you can always get yourself in trouble with, is, oh gee, what's in that jar? Gee, I don't know. Now, a striping brush is a brush with long hair. What I like to do, notice that I'm starting on the bottom first. Always a good idea to do the bottom. This way you get your little rhythm and technique down pat. And I just want to lay out on each rib one coat. This is nice thin material, so it'll get a good bond. First coat of dope you put on, you always want to put on much thinner than all the rest, so you get a bond into the wood. Now, I've even tried using Rejuvenator for the first coat. That seems to work. Although for this finish, I want to stick with all Brodak dope products until I get that down to a science. As if we ever could get it down to a science. There's always little gremlins in finishing. And by the way, this I hope is going to be in the course of the next month or two, or 3 months, or maybe a year. I don't know. This plane's been under construction for so long. Anyway, I would really like this to be remembered as the first real plane that showed up at the Nats. Maybe there'll be others. But the first one finished using all Brodak's new dope products. And I really am enthusiastic about this. Anyway, this is the technique. I'm going to try to get 3, 4, 5 coats on, letting it dry between coats. And by this afternoon, especially if it's sunny out there, and I can put it out in the sun to dry a half hour, an hour, by tonight I'll be ready to maybe even tissue it, I don't know. Now, even if you have a D-tube wing, a Nobler wing, a Brodak Nobler, or Cardinal, a Brodak Cardinal, an SV11, an Impact, doesn't matter. You want to get the first coats of dope on very, very thin. I say that over and over again. You can see this dope, it looks like water. Now you can thicken up each coat a little bit more. You can add a little material, but that first coat really needs to penetrate into it, especially if you have soft 4 to 6 pound wood. Anyway, pretty redundant. We got a couple hours of just laying stripes on like this. And I'll get a wider brush and do the perimeters. Question, as always, is how much dope do you want to put on the raw wood? Well, I think you should put just enough that you see a little bit of a shine. And you should put enough on, hopefully, if you're really striving for the nicest finish you can put on, put 2 or 3 brush coats on and give it a real light sanding with 400, 320, just to get the fuzz off. It's called not a sanding. You're not changing the shape of things. You're just getting the fuzz off. Every field and lawn. Again, if you don't have enough on, you're going to have trouble getting the silk span to stick down properly. If you have too much, it's going to come up through the silk span anyway. It's not going to really have a negative impact on the plane. And if in doubt a little bit too much, one extra coat is better than one not enough, especially when they're thin coats. Thin being about 65 to 70% Brodak thinner, and the rest, of course, clear.
Finds the winter winds blow cold.
I like to put on a lot of thin coats, get a lot better penetration, and the benefit is a lot less sanding, too, at the same time. Now this is Brodak primer that I'm putting on the ribs, and this may be a good idea to even do this to, D-tube wings, I don't know. I want to get a nice surface for the tissue to lay against. So of course I already have clear on. Now I thin out the primer a little more than 50-50, it's probably 60-40. And one of the nice things is it'll give me a little surfacing agent here to try to get a nice surface, and I can pick up any high or low spots along the way. Now especially, let's make a pretend thing up like a Banshee. This would be a good thing on the Banshee ribs where they're not cap stripped and you get a nice surface right on the top. The striping brush has long hair. You want to lay this on. The exceptional quality that Brodak dope has is it lays down. It doesn't leave a lot of brush marks when it's thin properly. So you want to practice your little mixing technique until you get it where it'll lay down with very little or no brush marks at all. See, by doing this I can spot there's a little imperfection. Yeah, little imperfections in the wood caps. Now once they're tissued, then what happens, it's harder and harder to spot them. Get used to using a striping brush. It adds a nice little detail to your work. Especially, let's say you have a Brodak Nobler tail where the ribs are very thin in the back. Another nice place to use it. And I find again, as I said in the beginning of this video, the fussier you are in the beginning, right now, every hour that I spend right now, I'm buying 5 hours of, after the plane is ready to be buffed, filling things in with all that putty and red lead and back and forth, and it never seems to come out right. The best investment in the world is pay up front. Now I think we'll let this dry and we'll give this like maybe 3 coats of primer. Important thing is, every once in a while put the top on and shake this. This has a very high solid content and it tends to all sink to the bottom in a matter of 10 or 15 minutes, but I think this is going to really work out well. This is the first time I've ever used the material this way, and of course if it doesn't work out well, it's not a big deal to sand it off, but any little detail you can do to the plane to just make it a little bit nicer, a little bit smoother. At this point in time, you're buying hours and hours of sanding and buffing later, where things are very difficult to do later on. And again, always a good idea, label a jar, very important thing. Always a good idea to start on the bottom first. This lets you develop a little bit of hand-eye coordination before you go to the top. And if you find a little error, a little glitch right now, boy, it's a whole lot easier to fix it than when it's got tissue over it. And the beauty of any I-beam plane, any D-tube plane, any built-up wooden plane, the beauty is in the reflection of the silk span, the little facets. It's that little specialness. And if you're going to see a little mistake shining up at you, then you start to think, gee, I could have fixed that before. It always seems like it's a good investment to do it now, to me. Just like that building a house. If you have that part, if you understand how that works, how easy some of these things are to do now. Now the Brodak primer seems to lay down real nice with almost no brush marks at all. which makes the sanding operation, when we go to sand this tomorrow or the next day, and obviously if you have an extra day, the longer you let it dry, the easier it'll sand, but the minimum would be 24 hours. Especially since we're going to be putting this out in a cold garage to dry. Okay, that's dried up nicely. Now what I'm going to do is get a little light sanding on everything here, and this will be ready to tissue, and try to take advantage of the fact that Karen will be out today, and we can basically work inside instead of outside. That'll be a big help. Now what I want to establish here is I want to drag the paper. I don't want to go back and forth. I want to do a drag and find any high spot on here. By the way, this looks like this primer might have worked out better than I thought. I got a little piece of 220. If I go back and forth, I'm going to put little waves in this. But if I do a drag, I can feel a spot that might not be perfect. And I want to kind of radius each rib. And this is the part of the job that's just going to take a little extra time, and we hope in the final analysis, when we get the tissue on, instead of rough ribs with grain showing that we have to fill in, we'll be dealing with a relatively smooth surface. And this is the part of the job, it just takes time. And if you skip over this step, later on when you're doing your sanding of silver and the like, you add days into the job. Get it all right now, and it will be perfect. I can feel there's a little spot back there. It's always good, the idea here is to use your finger, not a block, because a block, you're not going to feel it. This way, your finger actually, you can feel a little impact. You can feel there's one right there. There's a little spot right there I'm not happy with. Again, we're going to find out in the final analysis if this is worth a couple extra hours, maybe 4 or 5 extra hours. We'll know when you do the final buff out, because what I'm hoping for is that I'm going to be on all little smooth surfaces that will reflect the light as the tissue goes up. I'll catch an extra facet by doing this. And if it doesn't work, believe me, it's not a big deal. It's all part of the craftsmanship of doing this. But again, the best trick I know of is just to use your bare hand. A block is nice for doing the roughing out, but you don't want to use a block now. You want to have your finger touching each piece and find out where those rough spots really are. This is the time you wish, of course, that you had a friend that would come over and do this for you while you watch TV, but let's face the fact, it's not going to happen. Really trying to get at least the areas that you're going to see on the top of the outboard wing absolutely perfect. Of course, we would like to get everything perfect. And there's no substitute for just running your hand over it and feeling for spots that just don't feel right. And every edge where there's going to be tissue joined in wood, I'd like to have a nice radius on it. Now I want to cut up all 4 sheets at once. I want to have them all ready. And the reason for this is, whenever you dope a wing or tissue a wing, it's a good idea to do the top surface, get it in position, and before the silk span dries, flip it over and do the other side. So I want to cut these plenty big, give myself plenty of extra material to work with. Using Windex, you could use water, you could use, I've seen people use not alcohol, windshield washer fluid, different things. Anyway, but I'll have all 4 of these ready, so once I get one covered, I can just go right over and do all 4 at once. Now I can use this for my pattern. Take 3 more. Get these all pre-cut. This is medium weight silk span. I want to get dope around the edges. Let that dry for about a minute or 2, just let it get sticky and tacky. Okay. Good idea to have the table nice and clean, not have any pretzels or pizza slices or anything on the table. We've got all 4 of these now. I can get rid of this. Take these one at a time. Just make sure we haven't miscalculated before I start laying dope in. Okay. Now obviously doing an elliptical wing is a little more work, a little more effort, maybe than a mobile or a banshee or whatever. But what I've always found is it's just good to start on the bottom, assuming you may run into a problem or you need to develop your technique. Let's say even in the worst of all worlds that you're not happy with the bottom. Before the dope dries, rip it up, do it over. This is not a permanent part of the model. This can be, if it doesn't come out the way we want it, we can just rip this right up and be done with it. I like to just dampen the tissue, not wet, not sopping wet. Windex gives me a reasonable amount of time to work with the material. It's going to give me 5 to 10 minutes before this evaporates. It just needs to be just a little damp. Now while that's kind of drying out, I can dope the perimeter that we're going to hold this on, only doping around the edges. Now it's always good to get the dope on relatively thick, let it get sticky, put a second coat on, so that in effect you're building up a nice thick layer around the perimeter, because you want some material to adhere to. Now, I put on, I think, 5 coats, but I'm not sure because we were sanding and putting them back on and sanding them, getting it nice and smooth as possible anyway. And I've noticed in the past the testing that I've done and working with Brodak's dope, it really is excellent. It has an excellent adhesion. It'll probably be even better than normal material like nitrate dope for attaching fabric, with none of the downside of using nitrate where you have the alligator skin finish a month later when you go to do your final coat of clear. So Looking for that being one of many really nice advantages to using the material. Again, to avoid a warp during shrink down, so let's say the phone rang or you had to do something in the middle of covering one wing. Well, what you want to do is before you do the other wing, relax the covering by dampening up the tissue on the other side. So in effect, both sides are drying at the same time, gives you the best shot that I know of not having a warp. Just get a real nice bond on the perimeter here. Again, it's a relatively difficult shaped wing to cover. But I always figure if we can do this, we pretty much can, if the wing were a little easier, the job itself would be easier. Now we normally have to do all our doping outside when Karen's home or going to be home. We have this is really an amazing little gap we have here. I'm trying to really take advantage of it, push as much of this out as I can. Okay, you always want to have a nice new blade handy. And there's a lot of different little techniques, little different ways you can do it. I just feel like if you can get one end down, you can kind of work your way out. You don't want to get any over into the open bays if possible. It's safe to assume you're always going to have a few little baby wrinkles in it. You'd like to minimize them, of course. Or if you have none, even better. Just like you're working from the middle of a bed, making a bed, you do make your bed, don't you? Wait, if Karen ever finds out I know how to make a bed and do laundry and cook, oh my God. My modeling career will be ruined. And there's no reason to panic if you have a little wrinkle. The idea is to get a little bit of it doped down at a time as it's going through its cycle of getting stickier and stickier and better at holding the tissue down. Because two things are happening: the tissue is drying, and at the same time the dope is getting stickier and more like a glue that'll hold the material down. Remember the first time I ever covered a Thunderbird? Wow, I thought I really had done something special. Went over to Harold Price and he looked at me and said, "It's okay, but not that good." And I was all proud of it, so. One thing good about modeling too, it keeps you humble. Every time you think you're good at doing something, you turn around and reality has a way of surfacing. Okay, now I like the old bare hands method. Once I get the material down, I like to use my bare hands to press it down. And now I can start, as this starts to tack up, I can start to work my wrinkles out of it. And this is the part that usually will take 5 or 10 minutes. It's real handy if you have a couple of friends that'll just come over and kind of... Al Knight had a neat little thing. He had a bunch of little clothespins with lead weights on them, or some kind of weights, that he just had pulled around the... Actually, this is something we could have used on this covering job. Now, it's amazing, any I-beam plane, any I-beam, if you've ever built an Ares or not that anybody in the world ever built another sweeper, but if you build any of those types of planes, how delicate and flimsy the wing is until the covering shrinks up. When you're building it, you think, oh boy, that's really not going to last. But boy, after that covering shrinks up nice, and again, if you keep putting coats on and press it down barehanded, I know this is one of these things. I'm only going to show this panel, and like in full scale or whatever you want to call it. Real time, I guess, is the right word. Now this is one area, if you didn't have enough dope underneath the covering where we're doping this down, it would be a problem. This wouldn't want to stick. If you've ever had a plane that when you pick up the masking tape, the finish comes up in a silk span with it. Hey, we've all done that. Anybody that won't admit they've done that, forget it. Now the other thing too is you don't have to get the tissue drum tight right now. You just get as many wrinkles out as you can. You can re-shrink this, and Brodak dope is made to give you the right amount of shrinkage. And a little test on our rudder looked like it was just about the right shrink rate. See, if you have too much shrink, it's no good, it's going to warp, and not enough, of course, you lose strength. Because you gain the strength from this kind of from a D-tube wing even. You gain the strength from the covering shrinking. If the covering doesn't shrink, you never gain that last little bit of strength. Anyway, this went pretty uneventful. I bet you're thinking I'm just lucky. I am. Anyway. Now while I let that dry about 2 or 3 minutes, and during that time, I'm just going to keep pressing it down. And if I see any wrinkles, now I see wrinkles up along the leading edge here, I can kind of pull them out. That's why I leave the wing hanging off the table just a little bit. I can go around like this. As it's starting to shrink, I can start to get the wrinkles out. But it's really not important to get every one of them out totally. Little tiny wrinkles will come out as the material shrinks once you put the dope on. It's always good. Work like a sun from the middle out. And back here I'm able to gather a little bit of the material up. And if you just be patient here, now notice the tissue is still damp, dope is starting to stick. You get a reasonably nice time window to work here. Now obviously a D-tube wing is a little bit easier because you have that nice big leading edge to attach to. You're not attaching to such a small point. But you want to keep this tissue there. Now if for some reason this tissue gets dried out, we can just re-wet it when we cover the other side. But you want to do both sides of one wing. You want to flip this over as soon as possible. Trim this off. I don't like to actually trim the extra material because I can use this as a little handle as it's starting to cheese out. And I can always re-wet this. With Windex, it's very, very forgiving. Yeah, it's almost dry to the touch now. Another thing too, on the leading edge, I always try to trim a little extra and wrap it around just to get a better grip. It gives me double tissue, adds a little extra strength to the leading edge without adding a lot of weight. I just give this maybe 5 to 10 minutes and just keep wiping that perimeter. Keep this all pegged down nice. about 1/4 of an inch when I trim this off to wrap around. Now, even though the blades don't wear out, what happens is you get dope drying on them and they don't want to cut nice. So you really need one probably for each side if you really want to do a neat job. Now, I always like to double tissue the trailing edge where the hinges go. So you just can wrap this right around, trim away for the horn, pat that right down. Now you just keep pressing it down. You'll get a real nice bond. Obviously get this done as soon as possible without further delay, so I'll have both sides of one panel done. Well, it's funny how the second one will usually go a little quicker than the first. As soon as I trim this off, obviously I want to get right into doing the other one. Then what I'll do is wet all 4 of them down with a little Windex so they can all start to shrink out and dry at exactly the same time. And hopefully we'll be done with this in an hour or so. Now I'll still continue putting coats of dope on here and patting this down with my bare hand till its whole perimeter has a good seam on it. And see, that's how much I'm going to just leave on there. I'm going to flip that over, tuck that in, so I have double tissue on the trailing edge. Now I just slit this where readouts come through. You can just keep doing this little action here, just going right down. is a little unclear. Okay, last panel. Going on now, thank God. Okay, now what I did, I have it up by the heating gun, just to let it dry out. And I'll put one more coat of dope on it just before I finish up here. Okay, we got it in here by the heating vent now. And it's ready to put another coat of dope on. I have one coat on here already that I did out in the garage when it was about 10 below zero. But boy, with the, as soon as I brought it into the heat, oh, it shrunk up nice. Now, a couple of tricks, a couple of tips that I've learned so far using Brodak dope. One of them is, and this is from Ed Gallagher, this is a squirrel hair brush. Let's see what it says. Recad 350 Pure Squirrel. Anyway, number 14. Anyway, what I did is I used this for the first coat, and it was so cold outside. This is really soft. And this put on the first coat almost like spraying. There isn't a brush mark or anything even close to this. So that was really, really convenient to have that. Anyway, the trick with all of this is once the tissue is totally shrunk up, get as many coats as you need on here. But of course, one of the things I'm going to be doing, I'm going to have to have it dry outside, so it'll take a little longer than normal to dry. But it's safe to say, even in cold weather, you can get a coat on in the morning, a coat on the evening. Now, if you're doing a D-tube wing, you'd want to get most of the brush strokes going this way because you're going to sand this way. In this case, we're trying to keep the sanding to a real minimum, so I've been putting on the material with the strokes going one way. Then as soon as they start to dry, and you'll notice with Brodak dope, one of the things is you can do what's called a float. You can actually float the material on. You can get it going in this direction, quick, put some brush strokes in this direction, go on a 45 and a 45, and when you're done, you'll have almost no brush strokes at all. And I'm going to demonstrate that as soon as I get set up here. I'm just trying to warm up from being outside this morning. But I let the material warm up. You don't want the material to be any colder or warmer than the ambient temperature anyway. But everything so far on this, just about as planned. Which I guess is pretty much what the captain of the Titanic said about around Newfoundland. So the first thing I'm doing now, because again I'm trying to work in the house when Karen's not here. So what I do is, and maybe some other people can use this little tip too, what I do is I get up earlier than normal, get the heat turned up in the house. And this is important. Then as soon as it's much warmer than I want it to be, I shut the heat off and open up all my doors to outside and windows. So now the house doesn't get cold, but any of the air that's going outside already has the dope fumes in it. And that's worked pretty well so far to get me through, because a lot of this stuff it's just too cold to do outside. And in the interim time, well, one of the things I have to tell you, one of the things that we've been planning is an alternative way of doing the whole finishing project, maybe over at George's shop, or possibly putting some heat in the garage. But both of those things have been relatively inconvenient relative to just working the way I'm working little by little and chipping away at this. So, hey, when I get the material ready, get Ed Gallagher. By the way, thanks, Ed, for that brush. It works excellently. And we'll put a little demonstration of floating on a typical coat of clear. Now, what I like to do before I go into doing multiple coats of dope, one of the things, you get a coat or two on here, which is what this has. As soon as you see a little bit of shine on the tissue, I like to sand it until I see a shine on the tissue. And of course I'm going to be real careful over the ribs. But I want to get all the edges. I just want to knock down any of the fuzz. Remember, what's happened is the dope has made the wood grain swell, and then it's shrunken back down, and it's swollen again. And if you understand, and that's why I put that little dissertation on the beginning of on the beginning of this tape, and it's the part that a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand why you can't paint an airplane the way you paint a car, where you just blow paint on and it stays level. It's the same reason if you've ever done a wood boat. The grain comes up, the grain goes down. No matter what material you use, some of it gets into the grain. And this is why I'm very careful about getting these little edges. And this, we didn't have Brodak primer on, by the way. And now I'm sorry I didn't, because I see that little time that I spent doing the wood tops, looks like it really paid off. And again, that's technology you can use on the simplest of planes, the simplest of kits, to the most elaborate, from the first trainer, light streak trainer that you make, right up to, I don't know, the most, who knows what, something that'll make Paul Walker quake in his boots, I don't know. Anyway, just getting these little details, and you can usually, if you get up close, you can feel it. You can feel when it's real nice. You can see the dope is powdering off. Anytime you can see powder, when dope powders off, that's the test that it's pretty much dry and ready to go. Now, I also want to get all the edges. The reason I did this part maybe a month or so ago is I wanted to see if I was going to have trouble with anything warping, twisting, buckling. So far, nothing. And this is not a real strong structure. This is probably the weakest structure on the whole plane. So if this stays okay, you would think I have a good chance of keeping the wings straight. Again, if you do all the little detailing right now, and you can practice this technique that I'm going to show right away. I want to show this in detail, doing a dope float. A dope float is very difficult to do using some brands of material. Some materials, no matter how you put them on, you can't go back and brush them over. It's one of the downsides of some of the modeling dope products that have been on the market. But Brodak dope, because it's a mil-spec product, it's very easy to do a dope float, and there's a couple little tricks to doing it. Now I'm just going to rub this once. Yeah, that does it. One swipe is all you need. Now, and everybody's intimidated by doing an I-beam plane in Aries. Not that anybody would ever build another sweeper, but any of the original I-beam planes from years ago, to me they had a beauty, the same beauty that a wood boat has. When you look at the most beautiful of the wood boats, the mahogany boats, the Chris Crafts, things like that, and I had spent the whole winter restoring one with a friend, and I never realized at the time that I was doing it what a piece of artwork an old wood boat like that was. Now, these little sanding pollywogs, I want to get in each one of the hinge gaps. Even though I have a little tool for doing this will work for now. Because we're going to do this again and again. Now, the other question is, how much dope do I need to put on a structure? How many coats? You can't think of it in coats. Think of it in terms of, as soon as you start to see a shine, as soon as the surface starts to look like this, and that's why video is so effective, I would guess one more coat on this, and this will be ready for a coat of silver, or a coat of filler, or a coat of something that we can sand off and see where we need. Now, see, I can see a low spot right here, so I can kind of work on that. And we're going to be doing a real test for the first time using the Brodak Silver as a combination filler and material. No, that's gone. Any little shiny spots you can see, you know they're low spots, so it pays to just pick away. Right in there I can see a little spot. And it's up to you to decide how fussy you want to be, how much time, how much energy you're willing to put into this project. Little spot right there in the corner. But obviously, the more time you spend, the more craftsmanship you're willing to put in. I think the nicer, even if you don't make this model nicer, you'll learn the skills and techniques to make all the future models nicer. So it's a good investment to do it right. And usually I do almost all the stuff I do. I could do this in the dark. I do it by candling, seeing that light reflection. That light reflection is what I'm looking for. And the powder, at the same time, it wants to be powdering off. And any little low spots, and I can feel them. Your fingers don't lie. Your fingers are a lot better at doing this than your eyes. And this is about ready for what will be probably the last coat of clear before we put some silver on it. Now, I had a little tool for doing this, but obviously somebody borrowed it, didn't give it back. So what I like to do is, plywood is better than balsa because it'll keep the edge. Make it just a little bit undersized. The choices you have, you can contact cement a piece of sandpaper on, but then the edges wear out. If you do it this way, what happens, you can keep exposing a fresh edge. And this will give you those real nice hinge pockets in just a few strokes. Takes 5 seconds to make the right tool. And we're closing in on being ready to float on some dope here. I want to show that because that is really one of the advantages of Brodak dope over all the materials. It really floats a lot better than other materials. And that's going to be one of your biggest savings in time and energy. If it's done right, you'll save a lot of time that you will not have to sand out those brush marks. First part of this is to get the mix the way you want it. And this is, I like to use a coffee can so I can add thinner or add dope and get the mixture just about the right consistency. If it's way too thick, you're going to get brush marks. You want to get it just wet enough. I don't know if you can see that. There's no way I know of to measure that. There are ways you can use a 20-second cup. But when it kind of drips off like that, we get a nice little coating of bubbles on the top when you shake it. That's an indication you're close. I'd guess, if I'm guessing right, this is real close to being about 60 or 70% thinner right now. Brodak thinner, of course. Now, I want to use a little test. In fact, this is my squirrel hair brush. I have a little rib that I can lay the brush in. This is real handy if you have something you can run a test on. You can do your first float on a small part instead of a big part. Now, a lot of material is not going to go on like this. This might be a new experience for a lot of people. You can see the materials going on between the squirrel hair brush. And by the way, whatever you pay for a squirrel hair brush, it's worth it. This was one of the best things Ed Gallagher ever sent me. Okay, now you can see, I can see brush marks. So I take another wet coat, and you don't want to get so much that you're going to have runs. I'm just dragging the brush through. Nice and slow. The slower the better. I call this a float. It's my own little way of describing what I'm doing. Now, dragging the brush through real slow, real slow. Now, if you get it just right, you're going to see there's almost no brush strokes on that. It's almost like you sprayed it. But if you want to really be risky, you can take a third coat and put it on any 45-degree angle. I've noticed the squirrel hair brush does leave a few hairs, but as soon as you sand it, they come right off. I don't even bother trying to pick them out of the mix. Now, of course, you need to keep this surface horizontal during the time this is tacking up. And the last thing is, very lightly, ever so lightly drag the brush through. The trick here is just to get rid of all the brush strokes, or as many of them as you can. Now you'll see, if you look real close, the material is starting to lay down. It's starting to float. And that'll have probably the same or less sanding required than if you were to do a spray job without any aggravation or loss of material. When you spray, about a third of the material goes into the air and you wind up breathing it. This is a real efficient way to do it at this point. Now, I hold it horizontal in this way, maybe 5 minutes, till I just feel like it's tacking up. If I turn it this way, I may get a run, I don't know. But if you do each surface, they can overlap, it doesn't matter. Other dope materials that I've used, you can't go back over them. This material, you can see, it's setting up, even at room temperature here, it's setting up just about nice. Now, I imagine in warmer climates, I mean, it's cold here. In warmer climates, it might tack up even faster, but I think floating on a coat of dope like this as you build up the material is a real efficient, easy way to do it. And while this is drying, I'm going to go over and start one panel of the wing. To float a big area like a wing, you want to get each vertical, this surface horizontal, and let it dry up. If you turn it up this way, obviously you run the risk of having a run. Another test here is when you start putting this on the first couple of ribs and you see you're getting a run, well, the material's too thin. If you see in brush strokes, the material's too thick. So you want to have a nice big batch you can kind of fine tune as you go along. Again, you're going to find out in shop conditions where it's hot, you're going to need more thinner. Shop conditions where it's cool, like where we are, we can make the mixture a little thicker. But I'm just laying this on one rib at a time. Now, because this doesn't have as much of a base, this only has 1 or 2 coats, I think, of base on it, this is not going to float out anywhere near as nice as the first coat. This is going to go on, and you're going to see the little imperfections, the little holes in the silk span. No problem. We get 1 coat on and go right into the second coat. But again, we want to do one side, flip it over, and do the other side. You want both sides of a panel wet at the same time, both sides dry at the same time. And part of the trick of doing this real efficiently is the squirrel hairbrush. This is real soft hairs. Again, I ought to mention that Ed Gallagher has sent so many things up here. I feel like it's Ed and Wendy's shop sometimes. But a lot of them have really turned out to be things that I've used every day, especially in the world of composites. And so I'm just glad that people like that are willing to share the information. Anyway, and Ed, when you start using this material, and I know he's going to start using this soon, I know you're going to be thrilled about it. And this is a material that's, I don't know, usable in RC, usable in helicopters, usable in boats. I did some molds with it already. I tested it on a whole bunch of little test parts to come up with this little technique, and it works. We redid some parts. I did some tsunami parts. I think we're real close to having this material as bulletproof and as user-friendly as anything can possibly be. Now, the first coat is on. Because this is tissue, and it's not sealed yet, it's starting to dry out randomly. So before it dries out, I want to get a coat on with this brush strokes going this way. You really can't do this with other material. You would be leaving brush strokes like crazy if you were doing this right now. In fact, they tell you on some of the instructions for dope not to go back and rebrush a wet coat of dope. Well, not on this material. That's not really a problem. Again, I'm sure there's some people that are going to be thinking, well, Brodak dope is just the same dope as we've had over the years in a different label. Not so. This is really a whole different realm of finishing. And this winter in the shop, we have at least 4 or 5 planes we're going to finish. We're doing a repair on Strega. We're going to do Mike's Nobler, 2 Cardinals for Kajeski, Peabody's plane. I'm expecting by the end of this spring that we are going to know more about this material and maybe than Randolph, who knows. Anyway, Randolph has been real cooperative, real helpful. Got to give them full credit for being interested in supporting their product. Any question I've ever had, they've been quick to answer it, quick to come up with a solution. And the end result is the modeling community now has a really, sounds like I'm running an advertisement here selling orange juice. What we need is to get Michael Jordan to endorse it. Can you imagine that, Mike? I'm Michael Jordan and I use Brodak dope. Now, this coat I'm getting on a 45-degree angle, and you may be thinking, uh-oh, isn't he putting too much dope on at one time? Well, no, because what I'm going to do as soon as it's done, Mike Kajeski's here, and he's going to hold it so I can do the other side. Actually, if I had one more coat on here, this would already be sealed and shiny. For lack of a better word, I call this a float, because I don't know what the real word would be, but I know you get a better bond between coats if you can get them on while they're wet. And the myth that you have to let each coat dry out Yeah, up to a point that's true, but it's not totally true. Because if dope dries out too long, then you don't really get that good bond between coats. I've found that to be true anyway. Now, I know Bill Mazzoni has some of this material. I know Frank McMillan's already using it. By the way, by the time you actually see this video, I think John will be ready to start shipping. I'll have an inventory of it here for somebody that wants just to come over and pick it up. Now I can see I've gotten this so nice and wet that I'm down into the primer that was on the ribs, and it's coming up in little hair areas. Not going to hurt anything. It looked like that was a good investment doing that little primer on the ribs. Okay, now I want to show this up close. It looks like it's not sealed yet. But we'll let this dry. The next coat, I'm sure the next coat will be a coat that'll seal right up. And I'll do it off camera. I'll do exactly the same thing. Have Mike flip it over. I don't want to do this panel and that panel. No good. I want to do this, flip it over and do the other side. Then do that side, flip it over to the other side. So they're both drying at the same time. That's the whole key to life here. What I do to brush the other side is I hold it out off the table. Or if you're going to have a side up on a fuzzy material, put a piece of wax paper underneath it. That's a good way to get around that problem. Now we got the top and the bottom of that wing done, and we're going to have to repeat it for this side, but I'm going to make sure Mike is holding it that we don't run into the fuzzy area here. Again, if you're in doubt, a good piece of wax paper, tin foil. You don't want to have anything like I have fuzzy, but I want the soft blanket so that I don't poke a hole in it. And of course, this is the time starting right now. You want to make sure you don't have any tchotchkes, any knives, blades, Mike's false teeth, anything sitting down there. Nothing that will ruin your whole day. You can see already, even though we only have a few coats of dope, you can see how that I-beam wing reflects the light like a diamond. Now, one of the things we've been doing as one of the side projects, working with Brodak dope, we've been doing a lot of repair work. This has 2 coats of clear on it already. It's all shrunk up. This is a repair that we're doing on a separate video. It's very, very nice. Now, this is ready to be sanded, and I may do this tonight or tomorrow, whenever, but notice what I'm doing. I have one thing drying. While one thing is drying, I'm working on something else. I always try to get my dry times down, because if not, you get impatient and you want to start sanding. And when you want to see what your dry time should be, now this has been sitting out there overnight, you need to take a little test. And if you don't get any chewing gum on the paper, and if it powders off in powder form, you know it's ready to sand. But this is a separate tape. We're not going to get into this right now. Take the old Spitfire outside, let it dry in the garage overnight, and we'll work on it tomorrow. Hey, this morning what I want to do, I want to just check that I don't have any spots I need to work on here. I want to take a striping brush. Usually a striping brush would be one you'd call the striping brush has longer than average hairs, not real short hairs. And I want to run a very careful bead of clear right down each rib cap. Now, and of course on a leading and trailing edge. Not doing the silk screen areas. So that what will happen is I'll have 4, 5, 6 extra coats. It will depend. I'll see how quickly the material builds up. Right on these caps, and this is a good idea to do on a wing like a Nobler wing, a Cardinal wing, whatever, any wing with ribs. But the important thing is this is where you'll have a place where you sand or buff through or a rough spot. You almost never will buff through right in the middle. You'll always buff through on the rib. So this gives us a little extra strength, adds almost no weight at all, and gives us a real nice, that real smooth look of the rib. Nothing worse than when you look down a cap strip or a rib and you see something that isn't really nice and straight. So I'll try to get maybe 3 or 4 coats on today, maybe an hour or 2 between drying. But this is one of the things I'm going to be doing while I'm working on another project, and I can just go to this, let it dry, come back, go to this, let it dry. until I get maybe 4 or 5 coats on all the rib bays. Well, of course, always good to practice on the bottom, get a little feel for what you're trying to do, technique. It's not as hard as it may look. Hey, you might be thinking, well, gee whiz, why not just paint the whole thing? Well, that's how you build up extra weight, I think. I just want to get places on the plane where I need 20 coats of dope, or the rib tops. Places where I don't need a lot, I just need enough to seal a silk span and to put my base finish on. So by using this technique, I save probably quite a bit of the weight, because I only have the dope where I need extra copies. Boy, it's early in the morning. Need that coffee. In fact, I'm going to go have a cup of coffee before I do this. I can see my hands are not that steady. Sound like I just came back from an AA meeting or something. Now the thing is, I'm practicing on the bottom. And I don't know, I'm going to try to see if you can see how that's working out. This is one of the best tricks that I've ever seen in finishing to keep the weight down. When you wind up just blowing coat after coat over the whole wing, you don't need it on the whole wing, you only need it on the cap strips, or the rib tops, or the edges. We're going to do all the edges too. Now I don't want to get too far up the wing. In fact, I'll get to the end of where it curves. And then what I want to do is, I want to go right around the edge of everything. Because it's that edge. And there's planes that I've put 10, 15 coats on like this to try to save weight on the whole airframe. Because I know if I can get these edges right, every time I do this, I'm saving weight by not having to fill in the whole wing. If you practice on the bottom, I'm sure you'll build up a quick little technique for doing this. And the ultimate thing is the weight will be real light. If anybody ever invents a brush that hairs don't come off, boy, oh boy. Even though these will sand out, I like to get them out and things fall into the paint. This really is one of the best tricks I know of to keep the weight of the plane down. And if that's one of the things you're trying to achieve, this will help you do it. Now you notice another little thing where I have the gear blocks, I haven't cut the tissue out yet. I let that tissue just stay in there for a while till all the dope kind of shrinks up. Obviously, eventually we'll cut that little box out to get the gear blocks in. This goes fast though, it doesn't take as long as you think. That was the last little thing in this session. I put some real carbon fiber reinforcements out on the tips. So I had carbon fiber tissue, just hoping that this is really getting thinner. I don't want it to either warp or get busted. Anyway, this will dry now. Next time we get to work on it, we'll see if we're going to do any more sanding, pick up any more rough spots. To see how this, I got this little carbon tissue from John Brodak. George Spohr, of course, has the same equivalent product, but I wanted to see if this was going to reinforce the tip You know, the reality is that these are going to be very vulnerable in the finished model, and if I could bury a little bit of carbon fiber in them, maybe I could teach them to answer the phone by now. Hey. Now that's what the world really needs, is a phone that answers itself. Anyway. What I'm trying to determine here is I want these little tips to be stiff. And of course, once this is buried in paint, by the way, it seems like this sands out real easy with a little block. I'm going to try to use this as a test plane for using some of this carbon tissue at various spots. And in the past, I've tried using it, and I have been less than thrilled with the way it goes around curves, but that doesn't mean we're not going to learn some more. I know Frank McMillan has had good luck, or Woolridge, so maybe we'll have to make a few phone calls here to find out the tricks. But anyway, this is, so far, well, this is blending in real nice. What am I worried about? Now, one of the things I didn't like about using this carbon tissue in the past is the people I had seen use it wound up attaching it with nitrate dope, which to me, I don't want to use any nitrate dope. I want to try to use, if possible, all butyrate dope. And in this particular plane, I want nothing on the plane that doesn't come from John Brodak, so that if I run into a finishing problem, I can at least isolate it, and I can, from my house, go right over to Randolph to where the material is made, and they can come up with, hopefully, a cure. But I'm hoping we're not going to need any cure, number one. So anyway, this blended in, you cannot even feel the seam here. So I would guess this is going to be a real successful little repair. And of course, we'll bury it in paint as we're going along. Now, it's always important with this kind of material or anything that you be able to bury the seam where it ends. And this looks like it's going to be fine. Now, John had two thicknesses of this. He had some thin and some thick. This is the thicker of the two. So if this blends in, you would think the thinner is going to blend in even easier. And I'm trying to maintain, and maybe the carbon will even help maintain an edge here until we make the flaps. Anyway, so far with the paint material, extremely user-friendly is the only way I can put it. The berry got 4 or 5 coats of Brodak clear, and it just, with your bare hand, impossible to tell where the seam is. You can't tell it. I've got enough dope on there that I would assume, I guess we're going to find out, the tissue is attached. Now, several times what I've seen in making I-beam wings is the problem occurs that, let's say for instance, you didn't have this real solid, this would tend to wrinkle right here. So far that has not happened. Now, what I did out here on the tip, I was assuming if it didn't wrinkle now, it's going to be fine. This edge right here is fine, and I'll radius that all off with a sanding block. Anyway, there's an edge. I'll radius the edges right off. Always get the edge radiused. So important. Now, while I'm doing this, I have the little gear blocks, and I have the tip box. I can get some finish on that, get them tissued. So all this is kind of drying at the same time. Bud McKnight sanding sticks seem to work real well. By the way, if you've never used these little, I don't know, commercial nail files, they really are handy. Believe it or not, it looks like it's going to be warm enough to spray outside. So what I thought I'd do is just dust this off. I think this needs one more coat of clear, but I'd like to put the last coat on by spraying it. And then, of course, we'll follow that up with the silver. What I'm doing is soft back 320. You can't see, no, it's soft back paper. And just dusting it. And I mean just dusting it. No sanding, no hard pressing. Just dusting it. You can use 4-0 steel wool if you really want to be aggressive about it. I prefer At this point in time, the sandpaper gives me a little bit of feel. I can feel the resistance. Just the slightest little bit of sanding. I think if I can spray a coat on this afternoon, by tomorrow we'll be ready to spray some silver. I'm really looking forward to that. Now even if you have a D-tube wing, this is a point in time, or a Banshee or whatever, you just want to hit the little high spots. You don't want to sand the rib caps. Just the slightest sanding on each panel will do it. And it'll probably even be better. I don't have any 400 left in the shop. Probably 400 even be better than 320. Again, powder and right off. And that's the test of it's ready, is when it powders off. Now I just want to use my hand, not look at it. I don't want to see the light reflect. I want to see my hand. Find any spots, especially out there's one right there. Any little rough spots. Just the slightest. Now remember, we used that primer on the rib tops, so they should be, in theory anyway, really nice and smooth now. I-beam wing, an Aries or whatever, a Cobra, very labor intensive, but if you want that, the look of the ribs, the light reflecting off the final paint when this is all buffed out and has roundels and invasion stripes and everything. There's a price you must pay, and the bill is due today. Anyway, I'll spend probably an hour to do the whole wing surface, but I just want to give you a little idea. And use your hand. Always use your hand to find the bad spots. Your hand doesn't lie. Boy, you can fool your eye a lot harder than your hand. There's a spot right there. Radius the hinge lines, radius all the edges. And this is what tells you that you're ready. When the sandpaper is powdering off, it's this powder that tells you you're ready to go to the next step. And it looks like we're going to be able to spray out there today. I don't know if we're going to be able to shoot the footage out here, but boy, oh boy, the wind is blowing. Anyway, I want to try this. It's really difficult to even, difficult to even hold a flame with this amount of wind blowing. I hate to do it. I'm going to have to set up to spray this inside the garage. There's just too much. Even I can't spray out here. Holy mackerel. I hate to resort to using a garage to paint because it is really humid in here. It's really a problem with the humidity, but considering the kind of hurricane day we have out there, I'm not going to get much more painting done. Well, let me see if I can set up the paint in here, but I want to get a coat. I'm really looking to just get one coat of clear on this. I want to flip this over and do the other side. A want both sides wet and both sides drying at the same time, if possible. Sides of the wing wet at the same time. See, it's starting to look like an I-beam wing here. Oh, what a hassle painting in here. Holy mackerel. This was a real hassle painting in here. I don't have to relive this day again. Holy mackerel. But anyway, we did get a couple of, well, I don't call it 2 coats, it's a coat and a half of clear on here. We're going to let this dry. I'll hang this up out here. Now, one thing cool about Brodak dope as opposed to other materials, I don't know if you can see it if you can candle us. I'm looking for some spots too. One of the things is within maybe 2 or 3 hours, the smell is gone. It's got a dopey odor, dope odor, whatever you want to call it. What happens, I hang it out in the garage and 3 or 4 hours later, the smell is gone even in the garage, so I don't know if that's normal or if we just have intense drying conditions in here. Anyway, it's cold, it's windy, the wind is blowing away. I want to get back into the cellar and warm up. Got 1,000 other projects to work on here. It's cold. It's starting to really look like an I-beamer now. Anyway, this guy's been drying up. We brought him into the shop. He's nice and dry now. Ready to do a little sanding. Actually, we're almost ready to do a little prep for the silver. What I want to do, though, I want to make sure this is hard to say because it depends on the temperature. If this is drying out in the garage, overnight is the minimum. If it's drying in a house in a warm environment with heating vents, sometimes you can get away with 12 hours, 8 hours, but you sure want to do a little test to make sure the dope is powdering off before you go on to the next. If it doesn't powder off, then you definitely got to wait another day or so before it dries. Now, the object of everything we're doing up to this point is to get ready to shoot the silver. So we want to make sure that every little thing that we can see with the naked eye is sanded smooth, and that we have a little bit of shine, just a little bit of shine on everything before we go on to the silver. Go to the next step. This is worth noting. Again, this is such an important concept to understand. We started out with ridges and valleys. We've kind of knocked it down to where we have much less ridges and valleys. And we've kind of, I guess in the ultimate sand out, as many times as we have to do it, we've kind of gotten it as flat as we possibly can. And to the naked eye, a lot of times it looks real flat. And what happens is when you spray on a coat of silver, the object of the silver is 2 things. The silver magnifies little errors that are in there. And you'll notice, no matter what you do, and no matter how perfect you think it is, when you put that silver on, you'll see these little imperfections. Now, it doesn't matter. At this point in time, it doesn't matter what you use to fill them with. You can just keep spraying on coats of Brodak dope and sanding them down until they go away, until you can get a coat of silver that looks perfect. The second choice, another choice, you can use Brodak filler, Brodak primer. No matter what you fill these in with, you can fill them in with body putty, the 3M stuff. Primer is fine, but because we're doing an I-beam plane, we're not going to be using any primer in this step. This step, we're just going to be laying on a coat of silver. In each coat, now you might see just the slight, oh geez, now you know, well, put on another coat. See, you're using the silver actually for two things, to point out the errors and as a filler. And in the last coat, when you get down to the very last coat where you're happy, and this is the point at which you have to decide, are you willing to spend the extra hours for a perfect finish, the front row or whatever you want to call it, or are you just doing a sport model where you'd like to get this out on the flying field as soon as possible? So I like to think that in my final coat of silver, I want the plane to have no imperfections. And if I do see even a little one here, then I can do little spot touch-ups. Let's say I see little flaws in the finish. Well, gee, then I can just maybe spray over that little area and sand that little area out. But when I'm all done and I'm totally finished, I would like to wind up with. It's such an important concept. Now, a lot of people have said this, the silver method is the windy method. I don't know if that's true. A lot of people, including Jim Solhavy, have done this long before I did. But I picked up on it long ago as a good way to do a finish. And what I want to have in that final coat of silver, no matter how much sanding it takes, by the time I put colored paint on a plane, I want that silver, because that silver is going to show me all the little mistakes. Now, from this point on, when we put on our color and trim and whatever goes clear goes on, it doesn't matter. But it's right at this step, at the time that you feel you've done as much sanding as you want to, it's the silver that absolutely is going to either make or break the plane. And there's times I've spent 20 times sanding down to get that silver finish, and there's times I've seen dry spots where I needed to put more clear on. In this case, because I'm trying to keep the finish very light, I'm probably going to have dry spots on the first coat of silver. When I get down to here, though, I really want to have it, by the time I'm ready to spray the silver, I want to have it that it's perfectly smooth to the touch in every way. We're really at the end of step 2. We're really at the point, if this was a solid wood fuselage, or if we wanted to use a little bit different method, say if we were doing a profile, we wanted to do the body, right now we'd be putting a coat of primer on, maybe 2 coats of primer. But for right now, for an open bay, all open bay I-beam wing, we're done with steps 1 and 2, and we're ready to go on to step 3. Are we ready to mix the silver? Actually, I want to check the model to make sure it's really as perfect as I can make it before I get this mixed. Usually, I would say a good ballpark number is to mix a little more, maybe 60% thinner, 40% silver. With any silver, any metallic color, you need to shake and mix and stir. You just can't assume that everything is going to stay in suspension. And even halfway through spraying a panel, you want to mix and spray and stir. Another trick, years ago, people would put a nut or a ball bearing in the spray gun, so when they shook it up, it would tend to mix the paint. That's an old body shop trick. But we're ready to start on step 3 and 4, which is to get the silver as right. The next step in this is to get the silver as smooth as possible. Tricks that'll help you at this point in time. I always like to use 320 paper. I always like to do the final sand out on the bottom of the plane, not on the top. So if I was to go through a cap strip, which I haven't done yet, the day's not over. I always want to do the back part, the bottom, whatever I'm not prone to see real quickly. Nice and gently. I like to get in a nice relaxing mood, get a cup of coffee. Usually I like to do this early in the morning. I want to make sure the dope is powdering off. When you see dope powdering off, you know its dry cycle is through and you're pretty much ready to go on to the next step. Now I want to be real careful around edges, any edges. And from this point on, I'm only using my hand as a reference. My hand is a lot more sensitive. My eye can always be fooled. I want to just dust each cap strip, or in this case, rib top, very gently. Now I can tell ahead of time that we're about 1 or 2 maybe coats short because we sprayed some of this clear. But the bottom line is I think it's ready for a coat of silver, and then I can wet sand out the silver. And in that way, I'll be sure I don't have 1 extra coat on. In other words, if I have to put another coat, I can go right over the silver. The one beautiful thing about Brodak dope is it powders off, and that's what makes it a very easy product to get a nice finish with. There are products on the market that if you start sanding them prematurely, you get nothing but little balls of chewing gum and it can make you crazy. Now, because this is an I-beam wing, this part that I'm doing is probably going to consume the whole day. I probably won't even get to spray this today. But I will take my time, get some videos going on the television, get some nice music in the background, relax, because if I try to rush this step, this is the step that I don't want to rush. This may take all day. If I was doing a plane like a Cardinal profile, a Nobler, something that had a lot less little rib edges, well, it'd go a lot faster. But if I do 1 or 2 bays here, give you an idea of just how much time I'm willing to spend. See, you don't have to be willing to spend this time. You can say, geez, I want to get out to the field and fly. You can monocoat the plane. There's a lot of choices. You can skip a lot of this if you're not really seeking to have that super finish. But in this case, it's not even that we're trying to have a world-class finish. We want it to be light, and at the same time, I don't want to trade away any of this structural integrity. Dope adds a lot of integrity. Now, I'm looking at this, and I am thinking I only have 60 ribs, and 2 sides is 120, and boy, I've got 2 done already. So rather than record a whole lot of this, most of this I'll do off camera. In fact, it'll probably be tomorrow. This will probably be a whole day of work unless somebody comes over. Now, you notice how nobody ever comes over to help you when you're ready to sand out your I-beam wing. All your friends, they're gone, they have to work, they have a backache. Now, it's always a joy when you get this whole thing sanded out, and believe me, this was quite a job. This was a whole day of sanding. But one of the things I try to be real fussy at this point before I actually shoot the first coat of silver, because I know there's going to be some amount of flaws in here that I don't see right away, and later on I'm going to see them, and it's going to make me crazy that I didn't see them the first time. I tried to get the edges as smooth and, well, I'm trying to make this as scale-like, very like a razor blade in the back. Get a nice sand out in between the ribs on the leading edge. Now, I'm ready, actually, I have the little test parts done. I always have some little test parts. So while I'm mixing the paint, I've got a nice collection of Brodak silver here. In fact, I'm probably have more than anybody else on the planet as of this day. Anyway, I want to mix this up about 60 thinner, 40, do a little test on one of these small parts. It's really cold outside, so I'm going to try to get this done as quickly as possible. I'm probably going to have to paint either in the garage or right outside. It would be nice if you could paint in the house, but obviously we're limited. Now, always, a little test part like this always makes a lot easier to get the gun adjusted, or let's say we need a little extra thinner. The idea is to get the thinnest coat of silver on here possible to cover, because all this is really doing is showing us where the flaws are. That's what we're looking for right now, is where are the flaws. All right, it's time to go outside and do business. Yeah, this really did come out, isn't it? Now you can see, you almost have, this is the part I guess that most people really want to know, is how much clear do you want it? You want just a, see there's just a little bit of shine on there? But when you sand it, I don't know how close I can get on a macro lens, but you can see the fibers, but you certainly wouldn't want to have it that it's clear like it's a shiny buffed out plane, but just that it's clear enough that now this is sealed before you put that first coat on. Now, I always spend an incredible amount of time at this point in time looking for little flaws that I can fix before I put the silver on. Now, what's going to happen, we're really near the end of step 2 here. We're going to pick up step 3, which is the spraying of the silver, on the next tape. This tape is going to be an ongoing series right up to the final finish and the final, I don't know, everything that we do with the plane. But I really want to emphasize over and over again that it's at this point that you really need to get things really nice. This is the point at which, and things that are worth picking up off this video, always do the sanding with your hand, not by eye. Your hand is so much better at picking up the little flaws. And you'll see on the next tape when we start step 3, which is the silvering and resilvering, you'll see this doesn't look too shabby now. it'll look terrible and there'll be a million flaws in it. But again, if you get fussy right at this point, this is the point at which I think you really have to decide, are you willing to really pay the price to have that really first-class, first-row finish? Or if you're, in the case of if you're doing a sport model, do you want to just get it done and get out to the flying field? Both, of course, are okay. But remember that trick of using your hand. Your hand is so good at finding little mistakes. And you're going to see on the next tape when we put the silver on this, all kinds of monsters are going to jump out at us. And on the next tape we want to pick up actually right from the first to the silver that's going to go on there. We'll try to get the next two steps taken care of on the next tape. But remember, this is an ongoing set of tapes. To try to pack everything into finishing a model into 2 hours is just not going to happen if you really want to pick up as much information as you possibly can. But by watching the tapes, I hope you've learned something, picked up some good ideas, and I truly, honestly hope you'll share them with all your fellow flyers. I always emphasize to people, little tricks that are already on this tape, and I hope you've picked up. Always have little test parts. Little test parts will always help you out. Always have, even if, now in the case you weren't building a plane that had a removable rudder, take a spare piece of balsa wood and just put a finish on it. Because these parts will help you fine-tuning this paint job. They're always an asset to have a little test part that you can run out and set the gun, set something up, get it right, get it tuned in on this part, before we actually go ahead and do this. And we're going to be doing some silver masking on the next tape. Masking off with tinfoil, which is a trick that Will Prey taught me years ago, and it works so well. If you've never seen it, that's one that's worth putting in the bank. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the tape again. And really, thanks for joining us here in the shop, keeping us company. Ultimately, of course, what we're trying to work toward is having an even nicer finish than this plane, which was a 20-point plane and in the front row the first year it came out, and a double concourse winner. And to my knowledge, the only plane that's ever won 2 concourses. This is pretty much the paint job that we're going to be working toward, the early model Spitfire paint job. And I'm sure there'll be things as the videos go along, I'm sure there'll be things that you'll pick up that you can use immediately in your finishing. And again, thanks to John Brodak for the financial assistance in bringing this product to market. This is really a special product, and I really think all of us owe a little bit of a debt to John. At least we owe him a pizza anyway. Certainly looking forward to, with using Brodak dope, getting the bar even higher. And a lot of people say that I spend too much time in the finishing. Well, I don't think so. To me, these planes are artwork. They're really museum pieces that belong in a museum. And if one of your goals in life is to have a 20-point award, there have only been 5 20-point airplanes in the whole history of the event, and I've been lucky enough to have 2 of them. So passing that knowledge on to you has been one of my life's goals, and I hope that in passing it on, you'll assume the responsibility that you will then pass it on to other people. And the day will come when that front row will be just loaded up with planes with Brodak dope finishes that'll knock your socks off. And never feel like you can't contribute to the program. If you have a trick or a tip, something that's worth passing on, I'll be glad to pass it on for you and obviously give you the full credit. May even send you a pizza. Again, when I was a young kid, all I ever dreamed about were those shiny finishes that the planes had. And again, we'll see you on the next tape to get that silver sprayed. Looks like we got a paint day out there, I hope. a special thanks to Will Cray for all his help and ideas and inspiration over the years. On the next tape, just get ready to look like the Tin Man. Get ready to spray silver.